We've been walking through the forest with blood on our hands. We got lost.
Hey everyone, I'm Salvador, and welcome to Pitch Lab. I'm a footballer living in the Midwest, and I love all things soccer. I started this channel to not only learn about football from professionals, but also to share the love for the game with people from all over the world. And welcome to Pitch Lab.
We ran to see. She was the morning sun.
Hi guys, today this is Pitch Lab. I'm joined here today with Adam Brew. He's assistant coach for the Butler Bulldogs. And
Well, first, thanks for having me. I'm originally from Long Island, New York. Played for great coach Paul Riley at Alberton Soccer Club. Went on to play at the University of Michigan, and have been coaching since. So coached a little bit in the youth side for a couple of years, both the very, very lower levels of the youth side for a year or two, and then the upper levels of the youth side. And that's kind of where I got reconnected back with college soccer. Went back to the University of Michigan. Was a volunteer on the staff in 2010 that went to a Final Four. And ever since then, since 2011, I've been the assistant. Paul Snape, who's the head coach of Butler, was the assistant at Michigan, got the Butler job, and we've been coaching together ever since. Yeah, he was actually the assistant coach for, I believe, 3 of the years that I played. So I played for him as the assistant. And then as I was coaching in what was the Development Academy, which now no longer exists, those players were being recruited by obviously a lot of the top Division I coaches. So it was kind of at those showcases and kind of the communication through those players being recruited that I kind of got reintroduced to the college side of it. And Steve Burns, who was also my head coach when I played, gave me an opportunity to come back as a volunteer assistant. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be in the college game or the high levels of the youth game, but certainly that experience in 2010, I think between the conversations that went on in the assistant coach's office between Paul Snape, Chris Grassi, who's now the head coach of Marshall, just hearing kind of the ins and outs of college, the recruiting side of it, the budgeting side of it, probably most importantly the tactical side of it, and then getting to take that tactical knowledge and kind of man management and coach the likes of Justin Merrim, who's had 10 years in MLS. There's 3 or 4 guys: Suni Saad, Kofi Apari, Adam Grinwis, who's still playing, who's actually redshirted that year. Being able to see that level and influence players at that level, I knew there was no turning back and going to a lower level than that.
So did you originally teach for a youth academy, or was it like it just
No. So once I was done playing at Michigan, and I knew I wanted to coach towards the end of my college career, I had ambitions of playing professionally, but looking back on it, and now having 10 years of helping college kids try to make that jump, my wanting to coach was kind of a safety net in the end when you look at it. I know we're going to talk a little bit about the pro game, but I wanted to play professionally, but I also knew if it didn't work, I definitely wanted to coach. It was something that I wanted to do for a little while. So I was listening to Tom Brady's interview on Howard Stern a couple weeks ago, and Howard asked him, all right, being a pro quarterback in the NFL was plan A. What was plan B? And he said there was no plan B. Plan A just had to work. So I think a lot of the times with pro athletes, you need to have that mentality. Obviously, in this country, it's different than in other countries, especially coming out of college and having families that really value education. They know, hey, it's great if you can play professionally for a couple of years, but then you're going to have 45 years of your life where you have to provide for your family. So in some instances, it's silly not to have a backup plan. And at the same time, you hear so many stories about people who are just willing to grind through every adversity to truly make it as a pro. And so, like I said, I knew that I wanted to coach. Probably didn't give everything that I could have to the playing side of it because of that. And so right away, I came back to New York. Paul Riley, who I mentioned before, who's the head coach of the North Carolina franchise in the Women's Professional League, who's won it the last 2 years. He was running the club that I played for. obviously gave me an opportunity to coach. At the same time, I was 22, and so even though I was one of the better players that had ever come out of there, and had to this day, I was just texting with him last night, have a great relationship with Paul. I think it was a U12 B team on the boys side and a U13 girls B team. So that was my first year, maybe even year and a half of coaching. And looking back on it now, you don't know it at the time, but looking back on it now, it was good for me, as challenging as it was, because you're taking players who are, first of all, they're young kids, and from a tactical perspective, have no idea even close to what you were talking about. I don't even think they were playing 11v11 at the time. So you had to kind of almost teach yourself 7v7, 8v8, but you had to learn how to communicate with them. So you kind of had to take your higher level tactical principles and really kind of knock them down and get to their level to be able to get your point across. But after about a year or a year and a half from that, I remember going back to Paul and I said, I can do this to a certain degree, but I need my fix at something that's a little bit higher level if I'm going to do this too. So I think there was probably a year where maybe I kept one or two of those teams, but then was helping him with the kind of senior girls teams at the time, and eventually ended up being the assistant with another fantastic coach and friend of mine, Adrian Gayton. And that's when I started doing that full time, the development academy. So the sophomores, juniors, and senior boys, who were one of the better teams in the country. So I needed to probably do that first little bit. It gave me an appreciation for each level of coaching that you go up. But it was probably more in those senior boys teams with Adrian, where at the time, again, looking back on it, you don't know now, but at the time, I want to say we had 21, 22 players on the team, and it was in the league where you could only dress 18 players, and it was also a rule in the league which coaches in the league hated, and people around the world probably don't understand, but it told you each player had to start a certain percentage of games. So it was really the first look into man management, into being able to communicate with those four guys who weren't going to dress, and trying to look, a month, 2 months down the road, looking at your competition and saying who's going to start this game and this game. So again, at the time, you're just doing it, you're just adapting to the rules. But looking back at it now that you're in college and 26 to 30 guys on a roster, we obviously don't have the start rule, but you're still managing a lot of players who aren't necessarily going to play.
Okay, so my first question for you is, what would you say is the biggest and most likely hardest thing for a professional athlete to step up to the next level? Like, to make it, what would you say that would?
Instantly, it's the mental side of it. I think the difference between, the talent, if you take MLS, for instance, since we're in the US, if you take those top, DPs out of there, you take the Carlos Velas of the world out of there, you take, some of the guys who are, making close to, from, I don't know, 750 grand to 5-6 million. You take those guys out, and now you're talking about, a college kid, whether he's drafted in the first round or the fourth round or not drafted at all, and just, gets into a preseason. The difference between the guy who, is in the league for 10 years and the guy who doesn't make it after 1 year, the talent level, pure, physical, technical traits is very, very slim. It's huge on the mental side of it, because you're coming from an environment where you've probably played every second. So if you're fortunate enough to even make a team, sign a contract, now you'd be fortunate enough to be a sub, let alone to be the guy, in the stands who's just trying to crack into the 18. And so I think sometimes when you haven't faced that type of adversity on the field or in a team your whole life, and now you're thrown at it, it's like anything else in life. You haven't experienced it before, so you may not have the right coping, tools. Hopefully for those players who do, obviously a ton of it is just intrinsic motivation, toughness, resilience, that, can you develop it? Yeah, you can develop it, but you can develop it through living through it and through learning through situations. So hopefully you've experienced something like that in college, or if it's a youth player trying to make the jump straight to the pros. I think probably looking at little bits of your life, whether it's maybe not even in soccer, where you can say, hey, this was a really, really difficult time. I experienced failure. How did I deal with it? How did I, once I got knocked down, how did I get back up? Because it's going to continue to happen throughout the course of your career when you're surrounded with players who are so talented. And like I said earlier, a lot of them don't have a plan B. This is it, and they're gonna make it. They're gonna fight in training. They could be your friend off the field, but they want your position. You could be a young kid coming into it, and you say, "Oh, I want to be a pro because this has been my dream, and I want to make money, and this is going to be great, and I'm gonna get way more followers on social media." Yeah. And the guy sitting next to you is trying to get a contract for his 3 kids at home. So it's definitely a different level of what are you playing for, and in the end, it's basically, are you willing to, if you are talented enough to be there, and you keep reminding yourself that you're talented enough to be there, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be, how badly do you want to keep getting up, because the pro game is ruthless and it's going to keep knocking you down.
So it's about whether or not you can hit a wall and keep going. Well,
yeah.
Change the mindset immediately as soon as you come out of college and join a pro team.
Yeah, like I said, if you come out of college into the MLS and you're fortunate enough to make a team, I don't even know what the statistics were this year, but I'd say probably even of all those players who were drafted, maybe 15 of them, maybe, signed a MLS contract. A bunch of them.
Jeez. What would you? Here, my question number 2 is, hold on, I already asked that. Number 3, what's some advice that now that you wish you could either tell a younger person or yourself?
As a player, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about having a backup plan and wanting to coach. And I wouldn't change that for the world. But I certainly would have, as a player, dedicated myself physically a lot more than I did. I think nowadays, it's great how many tools we have in college. I can't imagine what they have in the pros, from what we now know about strength and conditioning and how, soccer players should lift compared to football players. The nutrition side of it, body fat percentages, the fitness side, sleep education, definitely the physical side. Not that I couldn't have done it. I should have done it. And that's what I think you see with a lot of talented players who don't necessarily make it. Again, the talent's there, but are all the other, physical side of it. Because at the end of the day, at the pros, you can be as talented as can be. There's a baseline, just like to play, in college at each level. There's a baseline level of, athleticism that you have to have. And so for me as a player, definitely the fitness side of it, taking care of my body, what you put into your body, all those things are definitely, what I would have told any younger player, not just myself. And it's something that we harp on at Butler all the time. Our players who are still playing pro, some of them aren't, the most talented people that we've ever had at Butler. And, they're not. Maybe 1 or 2 of them are, but they're constantly guys who have, really, really looked after their body, and have been always been super fit, and super, determined and disciplined, and had this mental toughness when it comes to, being tired and pushing through it. So definitely the physical side of taking care of my body is something that I would tell definitely younger players in general.
We've been walking through the forest with blood on our hands. We got lost in such a foreign land where we could be free. We could be free. I'm a pagan, I'm a pilgrim, I'm a sinner, I'm a saint. I'm one of God's children that's descended from the snake. We've been deceived, we've been deceived. She was the morning sun, slowly exposed to her brilliance, slowly exposed to her brilliance.